Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to Radio Nemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
The Jasper County Sheriff's Department, the JCSD, is responding to a Tuesday afternoon crash that allowed several lab monkeys to escape onto a Mississippi interstate. You guys have probably already heard about this, and they have caught all the monkeys. The monkeys have been put down. These were dangerous animals. Shortly before 1:30 on Tuesday, October 28th, JCSD reported that a truck hauling monkeys from Tulane University has overturned around the 117-mile marker. That's on I-59 north of Heidelberg. That is not happening right now, by the way, guys. This is already done. The truck was carrying rhesus monkeys from Tulane. The monkeys are approximately 40 pounds. They are aggressive to humans. They require PPE to handle. The monkeys carry hepatitis C, herpes, and COVID. JCSO said an update from approximately 2 p.m. said that all but one of the escaped monkeys had been destroyed. Mississippi Wildlife and Fisheries is on site as police were continuing to search for the remaining animal, which was eventually caught. This is one of those kind of great things, too, because this is where sometimes TAT rules, Truckers Against Trafficking, apply. If you see something, say something. Unless you are a deputized member of a wildlife and fisheries or animal control agency and you are actually certified to do anything about animals that aren't indigenous to the area in the wild, don't mess with it. Don't play with it. Don't do any of that stuff with it. It's too dangerous. The monkeys have been gotten, and that's a good thing. So I'm going to give you the finger, Dre. We are absolutely delighted to be joined by Rachel Corbett this morning. She was drawn to this topic, by the way, in a quest to understand the incomprehensible act of violence connected to her own past. She traces the roots of the practice in literature and pseudoscience of criminal profiling. And I'm going to give you guys more of a bona fides introduction to her in just a moment here. But the name of the book is The Monsters We Make, Murder, Obsession, and the Rise of Criminal Profiling. Rachel, good morning and happiest of Halloweens to you.
Thank you. Happy Halloween to you, too.
So let's kind of talk about the book for a second here. And it's beautifully written. It's pretty darn good, fast read. I kind of dig this stuff, but it doesn't always mean there's lots of people who dig this stuff and they don't write as well as you do. So congratulations on that. But talk about the inciting incident that's at the center of this for you. There's a background here at play that I want you to kind of talk about. The act long ago that spurred you into action to write about this topic.
Yeah, so when I was a child of about 6, my mother met a man whom she dated for several years. And just after they broke up, he ended up murdering his next girlfriend and then killing himself. And this was completely incomprehensible, obviously horrific thing. And when I wasn't told about the murder right away when I was young, but when I was in my early 20s, I did find out. And it was so, I couldn't reconcile the person that I had known and loved as a girl with someone who would do something like this, because his name's Scott. Scott was never violent in the slightest. I always remember him as a very gentle man, kind. He had his flaws, but not violence certainly wasn't one of them. So I set out to kind of understand what had happened. I approached it like kind of an investigator or, almost like an amateur detective. And I knew who did it, of course, who committed the crime, but I didn't understand who that person really was. So I talked to sociologists, forensic psychiatrists. I even met the boy whose mother was killed that day. And, I put it all together, and in a way, Scott did fit a profile. He was murder-suicide is a particular kind of crime, and there's a particular kind of person who does it, and it's someone who's often in a rural area versus an urban one. It's often white men, and the victims are usually a current or former female partner. And the man has often recently lost a job, which in this case, that was all true. So I I found this all out, but it didn't feel like it really resolved things for me. I still was like, okay, but that's not the man I knew. There's more to it. And so then I became interested in my own sort of obsession with understanding this thing that ultimately I just couldn't understand. It was always going to be a senseless, irrational, horrific thing he had done. And so then I wanted to know, what is behind this? It's not just me. This is really a universal desire to understand the things that scare us the most. So I wanted to kind of dig into that subject.
By the way, we are joined this morning by Rachel Corbett. She grew up in Iowa, but currently lives in New York City, where she's a features writer at New York Magazine and the author of You Must Change Your Life, which won the Marfield Prize and the National Award for Arts Writing. And of course, the book we are talking about this morning, The Monsters We Make. One of my favorite things in reading a book is thinking about being able to kind of do comp thoughts. And there's a real thing at the center of this, because the book is called The Monsters We Make, because what you're kind of focused on is the need to create monsters of the moment and to create monsters of a time that kind of fit in. I always keep thinking about the fact that on Halloween, I'm a big, big fan of all of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers movies, and because I feel like that they're giant conduits for whatever anxiety is immediately on our mind, go from communism to cults to a military takeover all the way to virus and infection, and that we always are kind of searching for monsters that kind of we make the monster. We actually kind of craft the monster around us. Can you kind of talk about that theory behind the book that's driving the book that's inside there?
Yeah, I think you said it really well. There's different kind of genres of monsters that fit different periods in history and times, and they usually represent some larger fear that's going on in the culture. I reference in the book Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula was, an Eastern European count who came to London during this time when there was a lot of fear around Eastern European immigrants. He had, some people thought that maybe he had Jewish features, and this was something that was being drummed up as something to be afraid of. And certainly there's movies about viruses and all of this stuff. I think we need these monsters because they kind of differentiate us. Like that's him, not me. I'm the opposite of that. It makes us feel like, it reaffirms that we're good and we're not like that. But they also sort of let us get close to our fears in a safe way. So, you might watch a movie like Body Snatchers and feel a little bit afraid, but you also know it's going to be over and maybe it's going to be resolved in just a couple hours. So I think serial killers really fit into this category. They're real people, but the stories we tell about them kind of make them larger than life celebrities, and this is kind of our, one of these particularly contemporary American monsters.
Yeah, and the other thing is, too, it's like very often, most of the time, when you find out about, and by the way, as Frank Figliuzzi's book has pointed out, there are many more of them out there than people often know, but none of them have the genius of Hannibal Lecter. A few of them are like the character Michael Keaton plays when he is the serial killer who has to give his organ to save a kid's life. They very rarely have the panache and style that often is found in the fictionalized versions. And you do a really kind of great job of kind of looking at works, literature, and a whole bunch of other kind of stuff throughout history and kind of pinpointing what it kind of, that the horror of a time is often the best portal into the anxieties of the time, whether we're talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or even like the Jack the Ripper case ends up making its way into the work of Arthur Conan Doyle, because Sherlock Holmes is an attempt to invent a detective who's as clever as Jack, right?
Exactly. Well, I mean, the first Sherlock Holmes story came out, I think it was the exact same year that Jack the Ripper committed his first murder. So, and I think that at least the reason, at one point the London police, at least a couple officers, invited Arthur Conan Doyle to consult with them on the case. And Arthur Conan Doyle was always getting letters from readers, asking him to help them solve a theft or a robbery, something that happened, because they just couldn't separate the man from the character. And so when he went in, he consulted with the police on Jack, and he came up with some conclusions, wrote a little bit about who he thought he might be. It wasn't accurate in the end. It didn't catch Jack the Ripper, obviously. But, I like this as a story because it this is the opening to the book, which I feel like lays out the long overlap between fiction and true crime that's really stuck around this whole time.
The other thing interesting,
And, still in the present.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting to me too is like a professor of mine once said, he says half of the interpretation of dreams by Sigmund Freud is a lot of nonsense. He said, but man, it's one of the best works of fiction of the late 19th, early 20th century. And what I'm kind of fascinated with in your book is the idea that profiling, the act of profiling, it in of itself is a creative endeavor. That we are actually engaged in really highly speculative fiction, and kind of playing games with that. And I'm kind of wondering if in fact the act of profiling is what gives rise to true crime podcast and the kind of in-depth serial killer fictionalization that we've seen. That it's almost like you create this real sort of study and the ability to kind of figure out what makes a person tick, and that has a bigger impact on our fictional creation than it does on actually solving crimes. Although you do have examples of some people who write profiles that come pretty darn close, don't you?
Yeah, so I think that's right. I think it's interesting that among all the true crime that's out there, profiler shows, the ones that are specifically about the people who get inside the minds of murderers, are really some of the most popular by far. There's like Mindhunter, Criminal Minds, Silence of the Lambs, these type of shows. And I think it's about, it is entirely a creative exercise. And even John Douglas, who wrote the original Mindhunter, has said that, Sherlock Holmes and Edgar Allan Poe were some of the antecedents to the practice, which is more of an art than a science in many ways. So I think that when you have these shows, the narrative element is important. The fictionalized element is important because it creates a story, and a story is something that I think makes us feel like we have control. When you say things like you have control of the narrative, I think it makes us feel like we're in control of the facts of the story. And if we feel like we understand a criminal's mind, then it's not so scary after all. It's something that we can rationalize. And, but the problem is I think that it's not true. It's just a feeling of knowing. It's a feeling of understanding. But the science in a lot of it hasn't borne out. As you mentioned, I think there was one study that found that only about 2.7% of profiles led to the apprehension of the suspect or the identification of a suspect in one study in London. And there's some of the most famous examples of profiling that went really well have later turned out to have been a bit embellished, that the profile was kind of changed later to match the perpetrator after the fact. So it's really not a super effective practice, though we may not be led to believe that from watching TV.
It's interesting too. I'm sure you've heard the thing that if you actually go through Shakespeare's play Othello, that Iago has all of the quote unquote profiler signs of what it is that makes a serial killer. I mean, he even talks about drowning small cats and puppies because they talk about the idea of killing animals at an early age, all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of Shakespeare's play, that one of the last things Iago tells them, and he keeps on giving different motivations for his crime. But at the end, he says, what you know, the rest is silence. And that goes back to your idea that these fictional attempts are an attempt to control a very menacing and sometimes sinister world around us, when in fact the real answer is none of us can ever truly penetrate the mind of what drives these men, and on very rare occasions, women, correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's a kind of madness, if you want to call it that, to someone who is a serial killer. And by which I mean it's the thing. Killing someone is to most of us the most horrific thing you can imagine doing. So how could we understand someone who enjoys it? But in this fantasy of feeling like we understand it, I think that we kind of strip away all the madness, and madness is unpredictability. And so in profiling, we try to predict, who is it going to be and what's their next move. But prediction has often just been a series of pre-existing expectations. And we see that in profiling, we see it today in predictive policing and other strategies like that. So I think that that part of it, that prediction part, is really more about ourselves than it is about police work in some cases.
Yeah, and by the way, you do like I said, one of the things that this book does is that it actually works in case studies, as it well should. I mean, since we're talking about cases here, it works in case studies, and it also does profiles of people who made efforts to kind of figure out if there was a way to codify or figure out the magic formula by which these things can be identified. Could you tell our listeners, without giving away the book, about Yale psychiatrist Dorothy Lewis, to give them a sense of the kind of people you look at here?
She's a Yale psychiatrist who specialized in juvenile violent offenders. She was working in this area in the 60s. She's really one of the first people to look seriously at what makes somebody violent. And her big discovery is that it's often a combination of sort of three factors. One is early childhood abuse, often, or trauma of some kind. The other is that there are possibly neurological components. So if someone is in a car accident or was maybe abused and hit, what can happen is you can damage a certain part of the brain that might be, say, in control of your impulse control, or it might decrease your ability to contain your own aggression or feelings. So, and then often there's something like there may be a disorder, or maybe you have paranoia or something like this. So when you have all these factors together, it doesn't always make you violent, but people who are violent seem to have this kind of trifecta, at least in her research. And what she did was she evaluated murderers for her whole career. She would evaluate them when they were on death row or at trial, and she famously evaluated Ted Bundy several times during his death penalty hearings, and she found that he was a kind of, this was her sort of the case that stumped her the most for years, because Ted Bundy had always presented so normal, and he said that he had a background, perfectly loving family, Christian home, there was never any violence, and she couldn't penetrate him. He either was the one outlier to her theory, or he was lying. And she Bundy died decades ago, but to this day, I went to visit her in New Haven, and she's got tubs all over her living room of labeled Ted Bundy and Bundy files, and she's still kind of trying to crack the case, even though, it's over in terms of his life.
To kind of, yeah, I mean, basically what she ends up doing is that she can't resolve it. I mean, and we end up back at Iago's quote, what you know, the rest is silence. And she's trying to fill it with a final definitive answer of what he was, because there were moments when he, and he was so, I mean, I am not trained in this either, but there are moments when it seems like he's as mad as a hatter, and sometimes when it seems like he's as wily as a fox. And that also could be part of a strategy, but that's the big wrestling match a lot of people have, because a lot of people's opposition to the death penalty is that these people should be kept alive, not because for any kind of religious reasons, but often it's like, if we don't keep somebody like Bundy alive, how can we figure out what the next one is going to look like? We're losing a trove of information. Some of the people that actually testify for him not to get the death penalty aren't like saying that, this is wrong. They're saying we need to get more information. I mean, that's part of it too, an attempt to kind of unlock the magic bullet that will solve all of these cases. And you kind of seem to suggest that there is just something in us that is unknowable and not reachable. Is that fair, Rachel?
Yeah, no, I don't think we should stop studying this and trying to understand in a scientific way. Certainly that was Dorothy Lewis's. That's what she claimed when Bundy was about to be executed. She went to go see him the day before he died, because she thought it was her last chance to get information from him, to kind of piece together into this puzzle she was creating of the murderous mind. And so I do think there is a loss in that, because there aren't very many serial killers that we have behind bars. So I think that while there is something that the lay person can't really ever touch, kind of really grasp about these types of people, there is certainly a lot of research to be done. And I think Dorothy Lewis is such an interesting example, because I think she's done really incredible research. And I also think she kind of maybe falls in a little bit to this trap also, of just needing to know. I'm sure it's why she does this work, because she's fascinated by it. But I don't want to give it away, but she kind of comes up with a theory for Bundy that is really interesting and unusual.
Yeah, don't. Please don't. Please don't. Yeah,
yeah,
don't.
okay, well.
It's really groovy, guys. You need to read the monsters we make. The other thing is, too, I kept thinking about this as well, that the more true crime podcasts we get, the more books we get on this subject, and this book does not fall into this category, but the more books we get that kind of do this sort of profile and examination, people who become, because remember, the killers themselves become quite famous. They start off in the fictionalized version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which you talk about in the book. Mr. Hyde, of course, is a serial killer. If you actually go through it, he's got all the earmarks of what people have kind of come to expect from one. But that's the question. Is it what people expect? And therefore, are the people who become killers reading this and matching themselves to the profile? I mean, are we, in fact, not creating them? Because the people who are going to, the people who quote whatever they're going to quote are going to find something even in, in Hanna-Barbera. But is there a thing that we are actually creating a blueprint for those who already want to do these things to meet the profile, to maximize their attention?
Well, that's an interesting idea for sure.
I kept wanting to ask, the book's so good, guys. I kept reading it going, I can't wait to get on. I want to ask her this question. Are we, in fact, constructing the anxiety of our times, are we encouraging those out there who are willing to add to our anxiety a profile to make, or to understand where the FBI would normally look and take themselves in a different direction? These are just thoughts that occurred.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of these guys are really famously narcissistic. They follow the news coverage of their crimes. They kind of relish in it. It's hard to imagine that this isn't influencing them to some degree. In what way exactly, I don't know. But these are people who are actually kind of, they're like, narcissists are these, they're very deeply insecure people who end up being acting grandiose and pretending to play God. But there is this, I think they're good at manipulating people often. This particular kind, this kind of sociopathic killer, the kind of Ted Bundy type. So I think that they're observing what the world is doing around them. Ted Bundy was very aware of his particular superpower, which was that he looked so normal and could behave so normal in public, and that he was handsome and whatever. So he knew that he wasn't going to fit what the public thought of as a monster, and he, played into that to manipulate women. And so I think also, I can't imagine that aspiring serial killers aren't thinking about what their would be, what they should look like. I think, who was it? It was Brian Koberger, the Idaho murderer. He was really into this. He was studying criminology. He was researching all this stuff, almost like either to perhaps, get away with the perfect crime, or, was he interested in himself and seeing reflections of himself in this content? And how could that not shape you a little bit, I would think.
And the other thing is, too, is that when you deal with vast bureaucracies that are kind of studying this stuff as well, okay, this is a name drop on my part. One of the people who was actually in my wedding was actually someone who was a prominently featured as a character in the second season of Mindhunters. And one of the things that he and I have talked about in studying up for this stuff is that so much of what drove these people was, can I expand my budget? And can I, in fact, rise in the ranks by coming up with unique and interesting things that draw some level of success? And then maybe can I cook the books and cook the writing in such a way that in the aftermath, I kind of make things look a little better than they really were? That sometimes a lucky break. I mean, that there was no serial profile on Son of Sam. He was simply caught because somebody did actual good detective work and expanded the radius of checking on parking tickets. Nothing more than that. And I sometimes wonder if, so many people have, in creating a cottage industry for themselves, have created a blueprint for the monsters of the future. And it concerns me to some extent, given the proliferation of not just literature, but media in all directions. The idea that you can scroll your way to a profile, if I'm making any sense here, Rachel.
Yeah, for sure. It's true. I mean, most of the serial killers that we know of were caught because they committed another smaller crime, like the Green River Killer, BTK. Dennis Rader was caught because he sent a floppy disk into the press that had his metadata on it. Profilers really don't often get these guys, and this became really well known within the FBI, and a lot of other agents who weren't in the behavioral science unit started to get pretty irritated with the profilers and the sort of media firestorm around them. And like you said, I mean, there were good motives for creating this media frenzy. You know, in the FBI's in that period, you know, after J. Edgar Hoover had kind of left the FBI in disgrace after he died, and it was discovered that he was wiretapping people in his campaign against Martin Luther King.
He was wiretapping everybody. That's who he was wiretapping. I mean, it was just
yes.
I mean, just a nasty centralized accumulation. It was a secret police state, is what it was. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with that too. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, but so the FBI was really not looking good in those days, and so one of the ways they rehabilitated their image was to kind of drum up this epidemic of serial killers in the media. Of course, there were serial killers, but they were not nearly as prevalent as they were making it seem. I think at one point they reported that there were 4,000 or 5,000 deaths every year in America by a serial killer. But in reality, that number was like 400 to 500. They sort of lumped in all murder deaths into one, but no one corrected it at the time. So they kind of created this problem, and then they offered themselves as the solution. They said, we've got this new strategy. We've got these guys in the basement who are geniuses, these profilers, and they put them out in the public, and they portrayed them as these, almost mythological superstars who were like on the same level as the killers and could really hunt them down. And it was great TV. It was a great narrative. As we know, it's lasted all these years since. But it worked in terrifying the public. The public, agreed that Congress should give them more funding. The FBI expanded its jurisdiction around this and did get a lot of the funding. So it ended up being a really smart strategy. And even Robert Ressler, who was a famous profiler, has said that this was a common tactic in Washington that they would use. So it's not even really a secret anymore.
I can't believe on this Halloween, and by the way, thank you so much. I feel like you're kind of a big get for us on Halloween. Really appreciate it. You got any plans for tonight, or just going to take it easy? Because New York can have a lot of wonderful things to do on this time of year.
They do. I'm actually in Iowa because I'm on book tour now. So just did my first event last night. So I don't know what we're going to do out here. Go to a pumpkin patch?
No, go to a corn maze. Corn maze is also a possibility.
Yeah.
Rachel, you are welcome back anytime. Rachel, of course, is an award-winning author and journalist. The name of the book is The Monsters We Make: Murder, Obsession, and the Rise of Criminal Profiling. Thank you so much, Rachel. Happy Halloween.